people really want to know what you cannot know, right? You have to be that much more disciplined and diligent. But really, our mission is to serve people who are getting started and help them avoid some of the mistakes and gain some of that perspective that we weren't able to have at the beginning of our journeys.
Hi, everyone. This is Jack Allwild with another money episode. Today, we have returning guest Aaron Ameen. You can find him at Aaron Ameen on X, the hybrid real estate professional. Aaron, welcome to the show again.
Thanks so much for having me back.
So it's been a while since we've talked last. It's been about 6 months. What can you tell us about your life? What has changed?
We were catching up before we hit record here, and it's almost what hasn't changed is almost the question. So we had twin boys, identical twin boys back in November. I started a new job, and we launched a new business called the Remote Real Estate Academy, which is a coaching program for people looking to buy out-of-state rentals. So all of that's happened in the last since the last chunk of time since we caught up. Each one of those was its own pretty big change. Obviously, the twins being the most. So haven't gotten a lot of sleep since we last talked, but everything's going well at home. We got happy, healthy kids, and no complaints.
Awesome. So when we spoke last, we were diving into your 8 remote rentals that you acquired in 3 years, working a full-time job. What can before and I recommend people go back and listen to that episode, but what can you tell us in terms of what problem were you trying to solve when you got into real estate?
Yeah, so there's kind of a deep-rooted personal situation that led up to getting into rental investing. And I've shared this on a podcast before. I'm pretty open about it at this point, right? But I was working in the entertainment industry for about 10 years, and it was fun for a long time. I worked in concerts. I'm a musician, and so I loved the environment and being around all these cool shows. And it's flashy and exciting, but it was really taking a toll on me. It was starting to burn me out emotionally, physically, and I started turning to my vices. And we were living in Vegas, so if that tells you anything about how easy it was to get in trouble down there, things started really kind of spiraling down. And I was working literally probably 80 hours a week on average. I would work office hours during the day and go to shows 3 or 4 nights a week. And it was just starting to completely wear me down. Between those conditions and then how I was treating myself, I did not feel good about my life and the trajectory I was going on. Luckily, I have a very supportive, amazing wife, but it culminated in me checking myself into an inpatient rehab program and trying to knock all my bad habits. I quit drinking on May 2nd, 2019, and really turn things around. Thankfully that sobriety is held, and everything started changing from that moment in my life. My wife and I knew we wanted to have kids. We knew we wanted to adjust and get into industries and jobs that we actually enjoyed and didn't drain us. We wanted a lifestyle that was conducive to having children. And so all these things, it kind of gave us an object. There's that saying, like, are you running from something or are you running towards something? Well, for a while I had been running away or pushing myself away from this lifestyle that I had come to really resent. And instead we decided to move towards this building a family. And so, long story short, because I've retraced it elsewhere, within 6 months of getting sober, we owned 3 rentals. And, I kind of pushed myself into real estate. I had some exposure from it. My parents were real estate investors when I was growing up, but it became the thing that I took all that negative energy I was channeling towards my vices and my resentment to my career. And I took all that energy and I put it into how can we build something for ourselves, something that will serve our family long into the future, and that will also reduce our dependence on our jobs in case this happens again. So that was kind of the catalyst or the spark. And once we started doing it, kind of fell in love with it, right? It was exactly what I was saying before. It's like we were building something for ourselves. You start getting the rent checks, you open your business bank account, some of these symbolic things that even though they might not even be 100% necessary, you start to feel the power of what you're doing, and the long-term prospects of what it could do for your family. And so I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with learning about real estate. And over that 3 year span you mentioned, we ended up buying 8 properties across 3 states. There's a lot more, behind that story. But that's kind of the crux of how we got into it. And, a lot of what we've done recently is I've done a lot of reflection on that journey so far. And ultimately, that's what led to starting this coaching program and the academy.
So what has caused you to start wanting to help other people kind of set up the same systems that you have?
Yeah. So, along the way of building our portfolio, when I first started, I didn't read a single Bigger Pockets book. I didn't have a coach. I didn't join any communities. I didn't do a lot of the stuff that I really feel strongly is helpful. I kind of went at it alone, and my wife and I, we learned enough to get the transactions done, but we did not use sound fundamentals. We did not use a lot of the things that I would now, advise people to do. We had some, ability to lean on my parents because they had experience, but then we were only getting that one perspective. And so as we went along and started expanding into other markets and I started networking more, I started realizing all these other ways, all these other perspectives we could take. I started reading the books, started listening to podcasts, and it just immediately expanded my mind. And I also started to hear some of the things that even though we had been doing them and nothing bad had happened, there are ways we could have done things that would have been a little better. There's mistakes we could have avoided. There's, ways we could have operated more efficiently, made a little extra money. There's ways we could have handled our relationships with our tenants better. There's ways we could have vetted our property managers a little better. There's all these incremental, marginal opportunities for improvement that we were simply not aware of. And so out of I'm kind of calling out my own ignorance a little bit in that I feel that if there were certain tools or information available to me when I started, it would have put me in a better position as I grew.
Mhm.
And so a lot of what I've done with starting a coaching program. So at first I was coaching people one-on-one last summer, and then I banded up with a business partner who's very similar to me to start this academy. But really, our mission is to serve people who are getting started and help them avoid some of the mistakes and gain some of that perspective that we weren't able to have at the beginning of our journeys. I just think that particularly in today's environment, when it's harder to find deals and it's harder to find, cash flow and profitable deals to get into, you have to be that much more disciplined and diligent and really learn those fundamentals up front.
Mhm. So as you've been getting started on the coaching side, what have you seen your students struggle with?
Yeah, I love this question because it's not most people think that the biggest barriers are time, money, and experience. And yes, those are big barriers. But the biggest barrier I've seen in my conversations, of which I've had, dozens and dozens of discovery calls, and also been able to serve, over 20 clients at this point who have become, coaching clients. Fear. Fear is the number one barrier. Fear and anxiety. People really want to know what you cannot know, right? That
Mhm.
ultimately you can't eliminate the unknown, the risk that comes with buying a property. People extrapolate and kind of play out the worst case scenarios in their head, and they let that stop them from taking action. And of course, as with anything in life, there's always a risk that the worst case scenario happens, but ordinarily it doesn't, right?
Mhm.
And there are things you can do. There's ways you can protect your risk. There's insurance. There's operational processes you can install. There's checks and balances. There's screening. There's so many things you can do to protect against the worst outcomes that I think once a lot of people they just need to hear that there is a way to address that fear that they're having. You validate it and say it's totally normal to be anxious and even afraid about putting this much money into something that, especially remote rentals, where you might not even be able to see them. So you validate that, but then you also come up with a series of kind of plays that they can take to mitigate that risk. That's what I've noticed.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that kind of touches it. Yeah, everyone wants to make like the perfect decision, but it's really not possible. And I think the best way I've heard it described was by a former poker player, Annie Duke. I don't know if
Yeah, I
for
love.
people that haven't read her books, they really should. But she has this concept called resulting, where she really makes an emphasis on you need to separate the decision from the result. And because you can knowing all the facts, there could be a certain move that you should probably be making, and you just have to be okay with the result. And I think people, maybe the solution is to practice more poker or deal with games that there is uncertainty involved.
My favorite example, I love that you brought her up. I'm a Seahawks fan. And at
Okay.
the
All right.
beginning of her book, she gives
Yep.
the example, and sorry if you're not a football fan,
Mhm.
but hopefully this can relate no matter what. The Seahawks were 1 yard away from scoring the touchdown that would win them their second Super Bowl in a row. And this big, infamous, it's viewed as the biggest coaching blunder of all time. The coach Pete Carroll called for a pass, and they had the league's best rusher, and all they needed was 1 yard. And the quarterback Russell Wilson threw an interception, and they lost the Super Bowl because of that decision. So in Annie's book, she talks about how statistically that play it had something like a 73% chance of doing what they had intended. And so they made a calculated bet. The 73% is enough, of a good enough probability to call that play. The outcome they got was obviously devastating. They lost the Super Bowl as a result of the play, but the decision itself was sound. And that was the point she was trying to make is kind of what you said, right? The resulting, you can make a sound decision and still get an undesirable outcome. But ultimately, you have to train yourself and trust the decisions you're making and let the pieces that are out of your control, play out. So I love that you brought her up because I think about that often.
Yeah, that's totally changed how I look at a lot of my decisions, just being okay with whatever happens. Like I've done my work. The work's been done up front. I've tried to mitigate all the risks I could or eliminate certain risks that I'm not okay with. And I'm just going to be okay with the result. So I like that framework. So back to your students. In terms of where they're looking geographically, are you kind of steering students to certain areas, or do they come with ideas to you and you kind of vet them together? How does that look?
So this is an interesting question, right? Because I'm always wary of when a program or a coach steers somebody to a very specific place or a specific team. There is, even though yes, like I will open up my network. My partner Nathan opens up his network, and those are available to our students. We don't want there to be any perception of misaligned incentives that okay, yeah,
Mhm.
come take our coaching program and we're gonna steer you towards this specific team and they're kicking us something back. None of that, right? So we have markets we operate in. We're in across 5 different states. He has two, I have three. Any of the teams or the people that we work with, we're happy to open up those contacts. And then frankly, and this is part of the lesson that we try and teach, there's some markets I operate in where I haven't even been able to find the right teammates and people that I would feel comfortable referring out to or even working with, right? And so part of what we teach is how to find the right teammates or set up systems where you can self-manage remotely, depending on the circumstances. Where before we hit record, you were talking about how one of the markets you're in, there's only a handful of property managers, period, in
Yep.
that area, right? And sometimes the availability, the options are not ideal. And so we teach people how to analyze a market from the top down. So everything from the macro variables, all the way down to the street level, how to kind of vet a neighborhood and an area. We teach how to find different team members, everything from your agent, your property manager, lenders, local lawyers. We teach who you should kind of have on your speed dial, and then like the methods for communicating with them. And then also like some of the ways that you can stay involved without it taking over your life, and to where you still feel like you have eyes on your properties, even if you're 1,000, 2,000 miles away. So there are a few markets that we know that we have performed well in, and we definitely educate and share information about those. But I wouldn't say we have specific markets where we're like, okay, you go, if you're
Mhm.
joining this program, like check out this list and go right here. So we have kind of basic guidelines, but no specific preferred market.
I mean, if you're willing, would you be, can you share some of your students' success stories or like what markets they've entered and kind of
Yeah.
what they've been seeing?
Yeah, so we have a couple students that have invested in Pittsburgh. We have a couple that entered Columbus. We have a few that have gone in St. Louis, which is where Nathan invests. And we have people looking mostly in the Midwest and the South at this point. That seems to be kind of where the focal point of single family investing is. But yeah, Alabama, Ohio, and then a few folks that are investing like near where they live. So
Mhm.
even though obviously we're the remote real estate academy, all the principles apply, even if you're investing in your own area. So yeah, those are the kind of main markets. And then Indianapolis is another place where we've seen people kind of stake out some interest. Yeah, those are the big ones right now.
Have any of your students tried to self-manage remotely? Like I've heard Hemlane keeps coming up. Any softwares or apps that they've used to manage properties remotely?
Yeah, there are people in the community that are self-managing, and we self-manage six out of our eight.
Okay.
And so I actually have a nice that's one area that I really enjoy talking about. It is definitely not a walk in the park, but I think like I was mentioning just a minute ago, sometimes you have a hard time finding a property manager that you can really trust or really, accept their incentives. I kind of really despise that nickel and diming type thing where it's like, oh, we have a 6% base rate property management fee, but we're going to charge you every time we answer your phone call.
Hmm.
And so I think sometimes it's hard to find a teammate where you really feel like you're a partner. And so having the ability and the skills to self-manage, um, critically important. And so we do have some students that have taken that on and they enjoy it too. It's hands-on, they get to know the tenants and they get to know their house. And when you talk about uncertainty and fear and some of that anxiety around investing, the more you know your tenants and who's in your house, the more you know your house and what the issues are. And if something goes wrong, you're able to oversee and talk to the techs and help fix it, the more comfortable you're going to be with that investment versus something, you buy sight unseen and completely hand off to a property manager. Everyone has different preferences. Some people want to be as hands off as possible. Others are totally fine doing some of that work themselves. We want to be able to serve either of those preferences. Um, and I'm grateful that, that's some of the experience that I can bring to the table is on the self-management side.
In terms of like processes or softwares you use to self-manage, can you recommend or just talk to a little bit of your experience with
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So for me, for a long time now, I've used apartments.com,
Okay.
which used to be called Cozy. It's completely free. And you can do screening, rent collection. You can do maintenance requests and tickets through there. So people can submit a ticket. They just upload a picture and it'll go into a little queue. And there's even some accounting stuff in there, basic accounting. That is what we've used for rent collection. We did use Hemlane. You mentioned Hemlane, and I really actually am a fan of what they're doing. So Hemlane it is paid, but it's not terribly expensive. But that is a piece of software. It does everything I just mentioned. But the real value add, I think, is the repair coordination. So if a tenant submits a ticket for a leaky faucet or an outlet that's shorted or something like that, if you have a list of vendors in Hemlane, Hemlane has a call center and a support communication center that will call the vendor. They'll coordinate with the tenant and they'll set up the appointment so that you can kind of stay out of that. And then they document everything for you. So you can set different
Wow.
thresholds and say, okay, if the repair is under $100, then just go ahead and do it and don't call me.
Mhm.
Um, and there's this kind of ongoing joke among real estate investors that at first investors always set the threshold at like $50. Like call me no matter what. And then, 10 years down the road, they're like, call me if it burns down. Right.
Okay.
So I think, that software gives you that middle ground between like a full stop property manager and self-management. So I'm a fan of solutions like that because they give you different levels that you can be involved.
Mhm. Not would Hemling be able to coordinate like a whole rehab too, or not that far?
I mean, I've never tried, so I can't say
Uh-huh.
if that would be possible or not. I would not do that personally,
Okay.
because I wouldn't want to outsource that. You know, if it's calling the main phone number at an electrician's office and talking to the front desk person and setting an appointment, that's one thing. But if it's anything involving decision making, like real advanced decision making, that's something I'd want my hands
Mhm.
on.
So I think some people might be asking, have you ever had to do like a rehab from long distance?
So we're actually embarking on our first full flip
Okay.
this week. So funny timing. But prior, we've done light to medium, but we've never done a full gut or anything like that. Just kind
Okay.
of been outside of our risk tolerance when we got in. The other
Mhm.
piece of that too, right, is that you typically can't finance a rehab with a conventional loan. So for us, yes, you can find sometimes better deals if you can buy something underpriced. That's a strategy we were able to teach. But for me and for my wife and I and our circumstances when we were originally buying, that didn't really fit our preferences or lifestyle at the time. We wanted stuff that was a little closer to ready to rent.
Mhm.
And so yeah, we did some light stuff, and we worked through teams on the ground. We didn't
Mhm.
do that through Hemlane or anything like that.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's transition into, so you went from the one-on-one coaching and now you've started this academy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the academy?
Sure. Yeah. So the one-on-one coaching was wonderful for just exploring and getting to know like what are the things that people get held up on. It also allowed me to kind of pilot like what's the order in which we teach this stuff. If somebody's coming in and they want to buy their first remote rental, um, which order do we go? Do we teach them to do the team first? Do we do the market first? Do we do deal analysis first? So I got to explore that a bit over the summer. And my business partner, Nathan, had also been coaching people one-on-one. So when we had known each other for a couple of years. When we finally put our heads together, I called him. I said, "Hey, we're kind of doing the same thing. Like, why don't we team up? And I bet we could build something really special." And so we compared a lot of the feedback and the results and the pain points that our one-on-one clients had been feeling, and we sequenced it out into a curriculum. And so we launched it. Our first cohort ran in January. And it was 12 weeks long. So we had 16 people join. Really grateful that we had a nice big group for the first run, because that allowed us to get feedback on that format. So we ran that as a live course and we ran it in the sequence that we thought was best. We got some amazing feedback. And so what we've done recently is we've now turned that into it's a self-paced course, but it has a lot of group coaching. So you have weekly group coaching calls with us. There's even one-on-one touch points with us. So at the very beginning, you'll get an hour-long call with us where we'll unpack your specific situation, and then you'll run through the content. And as you're going through, you'll be able to, work any individual situation you have that comes up. You'll be able to get feedback from us either on the group coaching calls or through our community platform. So it's really high touch, right? And it's meant to alleviate all that pressure and anxiety that we were talking about. Because I think what happens is there's a lot of courses where you buy them and all the information's there and it's good information. There's plenty of wonderful courses out there, and this topic is pretty crowded, right? The how to buy your first rental. Fully aware of that. I think some of the areas where I've seen it lacking previously is that individual attention. And so we want this to be a smaller, more intimate experience. We'd rather serve 10 people with white glove, individualized coaching than serve 100 people where we can barely have time to respond to their comments. So I like to say, we took the guesswork out of the process. We own over 20 long distance rentals between us. We've both worked full-time jobs the entire time, moving up in our careers at our day jobs. We both have families with young kids that we balance on top of this. And that I don't think that stuff happens by accident. We definitely made a lot of mistakes, but so I like to think of it as you get to access the lessons we learned from the mistakes we made and also the good things and efficiencies we learned along the way so that we can hopefully help people, if what they want to do is build their own portfolio, we help them do it as efficiently as possible and as mistake-free as possible.
Mhm. So I can hear people asking, so what have you found to be the most logical first step? Like if someone's going into, where do you guys start with getting that first rental?
Yeah, so two things. One, pick a strategy, right? So people get excited about real estate because they hear people that they know investing. They see people, getting all this what they call passive income, and I'm putting passive in quotes, air quotes here, if you're listening to this instead of watching, because I think the P word is very dangerous. People get lured into the idea that there's this walk in the park. I'm going to buy a few rentals, set them on, automate and just cash in my checks. Now there is a degree of passivity, but you have to acknowledge the pros and cons of each type of real estate. Some people want to buy Airbnbs because they're like, oh, I can make 4 times as much money. Well, it's actually 10 times as much work. So you kind of have to let people explore all these different types so that they can see how different they are and then they can pick one and stick to it, right? We ask people to pick a single strategy and commit to it. Our course is built around this single family long term. So we kind of make our case. We show all the different types of real estate, and then we make our case for why single family long term buy and hold is the best place to start. Doesn't mean
Mhm.
you have to finish, but that's the best place to start and build a foundational block, in our opinion. So that's one. And then the second piece is it's more of a mindset and a visioning thing. Uh, Everyone likes the idea of making extra money. Everyone likes the idea of building wealth, but why, right?
Mhm.
Why do you want it? What are you trying to enable? Do you want to go travel the world? Are you single or maybe married but have no plans of having kids and this is a lifestyle play? Or is this because you are trying to build something for your family? Or are you trying to retire a bit earlier? Like, what is behind the desire to get into this? And as a result, like, what is the strategy that's going to best position you for that? So it's the combination of those two things where people really want to jump in like immediately and start sending offers and analyzing deals. And we get there pretty quick, but not without getting through those first two
Mhm.
elements. So pick a strategy and then really understand like what you're connecting it to in your broader life.
Mhm. So in terms of making the case for single family rentals as like the starting point, what would you like? What are like the pros, cons of single family? And I mean, yeah, yeah. So what would
Yeah.
you say to that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's the devil you know, I guess, kind of. It's
Hmm.
one of those things where most people have lived in a house at some point in their life. Many people have rented. A lot of people that enter this program have owned a primary house and have some exposure to home ownership. And the concepts are really easy to understand. The financing is much more readily available. And frankly, you don't have to be a perfect operator to continue to have your asset grow in value. Whereas in something like commercial or multifamily or self-storage, the value of your property is based on the income you produce. So I think if you're not like an operator or someone who really like wants to get deep into a business and improve it in a material way, that just can be a bigger undertaking. And if you're working, so pretty much every person that comes in is working a full-time job. I would say probably 80% of the people have kids. And the idea of like taking on a renovation on a 20 unit apartment complex and trying to execute a complex business plan is a little harder to imagine at the beginning than buying a rental house that's mostly ready to go in an area that can support it with rental demand, right? So
Hmm.
it's easier to teach, it's easier to understand. It's harder to mess up. And I think that gives you the exposure that you need to understand the components of running a real estate business. It's also one of those things where you visualize it over a 10-year time period. On day one, it's probably not the most compelling investment, even if you're making $100 a month in net cash flow. But over a 10-year period, once you've been able to start paying down the loan, the house has been able to appreciate a bit, you've been able to raise rent a bit, um, then you start to see it more a chess piece, right? And if you want to get into a more advanced strategy, you can. So we just view it as the gateway, an accessible entry point that pretty much anybody is capable of learning and doing in a relatively short amount of time. And then if people want to grow from there, they can.
Cool. Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what you said. I mean, I remember when I was looking into, I was kind of enamored with Airbnb for a time, but I was having trouble even coordinating finding cleaners that had flexible enough schedules to possibly clean these units. And for my estimation on the like Airbnb, you have like a regulation risk potentially in certain places, and then also it seemed like to make it work with all the moving pieces like a cleaning crew, you'd almost have to have a lot of them for it to make sense and it not to be tons of work. Because yeah, you kind of have to ask yourself what's the return on hassle you really want.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite metrics, return on
Yep.
hassle.
Yep.
People, when you talk about rent, uh, there's also some bandwidth in your head that's getting rented by your investments, right?
Yep.
If you're constantly wondering, like, oh man, there's a turnover this Wednesday at my short-term rental, and like the cleaner called in sick or like that stuff adds up and it pulls away from whatever else is going on in your life. And sometimes, in some situations, it's worth it. If people are willing to like make that a bigger part of their life, then yeah, you can make more money,
Mhm.
100%. If you're a good operator and you know how to run something like that, you can totally make a lot more money. If you're a great storage operator and you're willing to put in the time to learn those skills, it's one of the best asset classes out there. It's just harder to teach, harder to sustain, and I would not say it's the easiest entry point, whereas single
Mhm.
family is harder to mess up.
Yep. Totally can see you. So, Aaron, it's been good catching up with you again. I'm looking forward to hearing success stories from your students. Why don't you tell the listeners where they can go learn more about you or get in touch with you?
Sure, no, I appreciate the forum, Jack. It's always a pleasure to catch up. So the academy is called the Remote Real Estate Academy. You can go to remoterealestateacademy.com. You can find me on X at Aaron Ameen. It's just my full name. And all the details about our coaching program and how to join. You basically, if you get on our mailing list, you'll get all the details pretty quickly sent to you. We are accepting students on a limited basis each month. So we open right now, our cap is 10 a month. That's just so we can best serve people with that individualized attention. And yeah, we're enrolling at the time of this recording, we're enrolling people for June. But if you're interested in jumping in, I'd love to hear from you. Very easy to reach. So shoot me a DM, find me on our email list anywhere, and I will look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Well, Aaron, it's always good catching up and we'll talk soon.
Appreciate it.